Wow. Yeah. Anyway, I did this film. I started this film in 2016. And at that time, I've done two previous films, one in 2009 called The Dark Side of Chocolate, and a follow-up film in 2012 called Shady Chocolate. And this one, the two first one was basically to expose that chocolate was made by child labor, illegal child labor, and how traffickers were working to get children into the plantation and work as modern slaves in the plantation. And that was the knowledge that the industry had at that time. And this new film came out in this year in, I think, end of March, and it's traveling right now to festivals and broadcasters around the world. I think it will be out on Amazon and iTunes within a couple of weeks, 6-7 weeks from now on. Just to tell you very briefly, this film is the TV version. I'm saying this because I would love to show the long version, which is an hour and 20. This is an hour, so it fits to primetime television. And what is left out is Terry's meet with 6 former slaves in Mali. We touch it very briefly in the film, but that's not in. It's quite an important scene to my opinion. But taking 20 minutes out of a film is almost impossible, especially if it's your own film. I think, I'm a filmmaker. I've done 85 films and still doing films as we speak. I think that's for now.
Thanks, Miki. Now, what Miki did with this film was to follow Terry, who's up on the screen here, for a number of years. And when Miki and I were first speaking about this, you described Terry as a sort of Jason Bourne in your mind. So Terry was interesting enough to spend a lot of time with. Terry, would you like to do a quick introduction as well, please?
Thank you. And it's sure good to see my friends gathered there in London. I wish I could be sitting there, but it's my pleasure to be here. I'm a human rights lawyer with international rights advocates. I have been working on human rights issues, mainly trying to figure out ways to hold corporations accountable in legal situations, in courts and in other tribunals, for their failure to comply with international norms, particularly on child labor, child slavery, really, in this case. It's important to note at the outset that we're not coming to these companies and saying, hey, I want you to respect this norm that I created about child labor. I want you to observe this piece of paper that I wrote about child labor. We're asking them to observe their own promises that they made. And you'll see in the film that these promises go back to 2001, that the companies all got together and killed a law that would have required them to comply with human rights norms. And then they came up with this voluntary protocol, the Harkin-Engel Protocol, in 2001. And ever since then, they've been promising that someday they're going to stop profiting from slavery. And the last iteration we heard was that by 2025, they're going to try to stop enslaving children. So it's a horrible situation. So I've been involved in this issue since the late 1990s. We did reports early on, we worked with the Congress and so on. And finally, when they issued this Harkin-Engel Protocol in 2001, we sued them in 2005 when they missed their first deadline. So the most of the film concerns that case and our efforts to litigate it. And we went all the way to the Supreme Court, as you'll see in the film. And then Miki jumped in at about 2016. We became, in fact, very good friends across the filming. And you spend some time in a car when it's 100 degrees in Mali, and you get to know someone. And we came out of it friends. That's, I'm happy to say. I also just want to quickly say, this was not a brief introduction like you had in mind, that We're not done yet. The film does not cover what's happened since, but we have a new case pending against all of the major chocolate companies under our new law called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. We also have a petition to ban the importation of their cocoa in the United States that's still pending. And we have some consumer claims that we have filed, and we're filing more to hold them to account for lying to the public about their efforts. So this story is far from over, and the film captures, I think, very well just how difficult it is to get your evidence, to meet the child slaves, and to try to translate that to a court. And it really shouldn't be this hard to hold the company to a standard that they agreed to. So the rest, I look forward to hearing about your questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Terry. I should have added that Terry's joining us from Washington, D.C., where he's based. We have Ayn Riggs with us, who's come all the way from the United States to join us this evening. And it's such a pleasure for me personally to have her here, because I hadn't met Ayn in real life until this week, until she landed. Now, the first question we tend to get when we raise this subject is, well, okay, if I can't buy a chocolate bar in the supermarket or the chemist that's inexpensive, that's a sort of a well-known brand, what can I buy? How do I know that I'm not engaging in the systematic, industrialized enslavement of children in West Africa? And the very quick answer is Ayn Riggs. Ayn has been running Slave-Free Chocolate. You can explain better. Yeah, all right. For quite some time. And it's basically a website where you can go and very quickly check whether or not a brand that you recognize from your country is something that you should be supporting.
Okay, hi, I'm Ayn Riggs with Slave-Free Chocolate, and I started Slave-Free Chocolate just to be a pressure group when I found out the Harkin-Engel protocol was not being enforced because it's not connected to anything legal. I thought, wow, really this problem should be the low-hanging fruit of abolition. The people who are profiting from it know they're profiting from it and admit they're profiting from it. The money's there, the power's there. They promised to clean up this mess, but they haven't because of very many reasons. But basically, they've just been able to get away with not profiting, get away with not doing that. So I started Slave-Free Chocolate as an activist organization to really pressure the companies who signed the Harkin-Engel protocol, who promised to clean up this mess that haven't. And as an activist, you're doing a speech or you're doing outreach, and you want a call to action, like, okay, you've got somebody passionate about, your issue here. What should they do? There's several things you can do, but one of them is say, well, where can I get chocolate that's not tied to slavery? So I thought, okay, that's great. And so Slave-Free Chocolate isn't here to market or not market any particular chocolate company, but it gives consumers a choice. It gives consumers a way to vote with their dollar. Now, the list that we've compiled is not nearly inclusive of every single chocolate company, because the bean to bar movement has just exploded. So I'm sure there's hundreds, maybe 1,000 chocolate companies that are not on this list, right? But in order to be on this list, because we don't charge for anything like that, they have to also be activists as well. If we send out an initiative, we want somebody to sign, they have to sign that initiative. If, if we say Mickey's put out another film, here's his film, see if you could get your audience to read it, we do that. So the list is really a way for people to vote with their dollar and know that it is possible to make chocolate that doesn't include slavery.
Thanks so much. Yes,
slavefreechocolate.org. Under ethical, yes.
Yeah, we'll make sure we send that round. And also, I think as you came through the door, you'll see there are a few leaflets there, and all the details are there as well. So, Terry, I've asked you this question before. Can you repeat the answer for this audience, please? Why are you the only guy doing this? It can't be because there's something that you misunderstand about the law, can it? Are you doing, yeah. Are you like a really bad lawyer? Is that the reason it's just you doing this? What's going on?
I wish it was that simple. I always have to first say that, well, you'll meet in the film Paul Hoffman, who's been my partner in this case for a very long time. He's not with a nonprofit. He's a regular lawyer with a law firm, and it took a lot of his personal time to help. But other than us, we're pretty lonely. And the fact is that if you look at what happened in Nestle, it took us 16 years to get to the US Supreme Court and then lose that case because the Supreme Court is now so conservative. So this is not a money-making operation. It is an opportunity to try to use the law to not only hold the companies accountable, but through the filing of a lawsuit and the publicity surrounding that, to educate the public. So if at the end of the day, I needed to show some board of directors or some partners of mine that I made a profit and therefore it was worth it, then I wouldn't be able to do this. I'm doing this as a nonprofit to use the law as best one can to try to hold companies accountable. If this case succeeds, our newer cases, and I am able to hold the companies accountable and get a huge damage award from Nestle, which is still my fantasy, then you'll see a lot of other lawyers jump in because they will see that, you know, you could make money if that were your objective. But our legal system is a capitalist system for the most part, so that's what keeps the field kind of narrow.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I know in other cases you have, regarding food companies, for example, this is exactly what's happened is you've proven a point in law, and then those firms, other firms can see that there's the potential to win some damages by jumping in. So I guess the quick answer is, from the position that you take, there's no money. What does legal defense, if you're with Nestle or Cargill, look like compared to what we're going to see in the film with you and Paul? I mean, what are we talking money-wise? If I'm a lawyer and I'm in it to, you know, make money, would I rather be on your side or their side?
Well, our side has yet to determine whether we'll be rewarded financially, but we certainly are rewarded morally and ethically. That it's a pleasure to wake up every day and know that I'm devoting my legal skills, such as they are, to trying to prevent child slavery, and that's a reward on its own. But when we sued Nestle, for example, they don't just have one giant law firm; they have two. You'll meet them in the film. They have Gibson Dunn, which is 1,000-member plus firm, and then they have Hogan Lovells, likewise at least 1,000 lawyers, maybe 1,500 lawyers, and they're both working on the case. So they have two giant law firms, and these partners, they bill $1,000 an hour at least. In fact, the lawyer for Nestle that argued in the Supreme Court, Neil Kochel, he actually bills exactly $2,462 an hour. So that's a pretty good living for representing evil companies that enslave children, if your stomach can take it. But,
but we have to move on from this. But I mean, in essence, what you're doing here is making Nestle's lawyers rich.
Yeah.
Which is,
and they don't even
you've
send.
created a business model here, which is working for not you. But anyway, but we have to move on. But
they don't send me holiday cards, not even that.
That's scandalous. I'll move back to Miki. Miki, you've spoken to me in the past about your visceral personal response to this issue when you first came across it. And in terms of, you know, us in the room, you know, you're the guy who has been on the ground with Terry and actually seen the industrialized use of child slavery in action in West Africa. And when I say industrialized, I think it is really important for everyone in this room to remember that we're talking about 1.56 million children. These are accepted numbers in West Africa alone. Now, you can imagine what that's worth. And you can imagine, again, when we say David and Goliath here, it's this guy, Terry, it's this filmmaker, which is adorable with their tiny budgets, and an industrial machine that depends on the labor. So you look at, we keep picking on Nestle, it's not just Nestle, but you look at the, how much does Mondelez's chief executive make, Miki? You know that number.
16 million a year.
Right. So this is an industrial machine which is dependent on very, very inexpensive labor in West Africa. So I'll get off my high horse and let you actually speak, Miki. Sorry.
Yeah. No. What was the question?
The question was, I remember you speaking to me about how you really viscerally responded, I think from your guts, when you realized what this was. You bought a chocolate bar and became aware of what was behind that chocolate bar. And then what that led to was the fact that you've actually been, on the ground in West Africa with Terry. And it would just be kind of nice to hear how that feels as well when you actually interact with children in real life.
When I went there the first time, that was in 2008, I think. I got knowledge from some local stringers or fixers who have been extremely helpful, because the thing is, this problem in West Africa is not unknown from the local. Of course, they know about it. There are strong people who try to fight against it, but they can't do much because, for instance, in Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, it's still half of the income in the country comes from cocoa. So the companies are so strong, and even though there are locals who try to fight against it, it's impossible. But they told me first time I went there, let's go to the local, that was in Mali. Let's go to the local bus station in the southern part of Mali, and you will see how trafficking is an ongoing problem. And we just went, and this was the first time, and we were just sitting at the bus station waiting for the next bus, just very close to the Ivorian border. And this bus came, and lots of children were just going out the bus. And then my friend said, listen, look at what's going to happen next. And then some traffickers came and took the children on the back on motorbikes and drove them through the border to Ivory Coast, and we followed that. And I just remember how heartbreaking that was, because that was an actual trafficking of children. And then we went into the plantation, and I have to say, this problem is so huge even today. Last time I was there was with Terry, and still you walk into a random plantation and it's full of children. They are not going to school at all. They are not helping families. They are not doing anything. They come from Burkina Faso, from Mali, from Togo, from Benin, all the surrounding countries. And I have to say, this is so systemic a problem. And every time I go, I really, really feel so bad. Because imagine when you see any children suffering and you meet them, you just want to take them, to just, either go to the police or take them with you, but it's impossible. And it's so heartbreaking. And that's what comes to my mind every time, despite I've been in West Africa, I think 15 times now. And it's still a huge problem. I can't even see many changes, to be honest, which really makes me sad that there's not massive changes. Well, the attention about the problem is huge now, but the problems in the local area is almost, well, I would say the same.
Thanks. And we'll come back and discuss this some more, actually. And I'd love to hear, though, one of the things that I really adore, respect about Anne is that she does the Slave-Free Chocolate website and provides all this information, all this engagement, absolutely for free, completely and utterly determined not to actually profit in any way from this issue, which is, of course, very different to, say, fair trade or some of the other sustainability labels, which aren't really, measuring this stuff properly. And you've had, run-ins with certain labels in the past. And are there any labels you'd like to let us know about any labels we should be aware of. I know, for example, there was Green and Blacks that was on your list for a while and then came off.
Okay, my big concern during this, because I started before the Bean to Bar movement. I started when maybe there were 5 people that were working on this problem. It was Humphrey Hoxley, it was Terry, it was Miki, and that was really about it. And so I think I started Slave Free Chocolate like in 2007. It was before social media. It was before the Bean to Bar movement. There was just a handful of scrappy people working on this project. And unfortunately, what I've seen is there's a ton of awareness on this. It's, you can go into a market now and there could be somebody talking about ethical chocolate. What I've also seen is the rise of, like, I guess you would call it social washing, right? Our attention span with social media and everything is, we're really all just sort of like gnats on cocaine or something like that, to try to grab somebody for more than 10 or 15 seconds. And if you are a concerned consumer and you pull the thread on something, you quickly get hit with a PR from the big industrial chocolate companies. When I first started my little website, you went to Nestle, they had nothing about kids, period. Right? There's nothing about sustainability. There's nothing, right? As consumer awareness grew, their PR and their smoke and mirrors campaign grew. And now I think it's even tougher to try to get people to say, we're going to write our public politicians and say, we want change. We're going to sit there and do something. People now think that, oh, I care about this issue because I thumbs up it on Instagram. So I'm done. I have a clear conscience. I've done my bit, right? So beyond that, then what I've seen lately is certain labels are using this issue that everybody seems to know about and everybody seems to care about to just sell more chocolate. And so what I thought should have been a problem that we should solve, I do believe this is the low-hanging fruit of abolition. We know who's profiting. It's a $100 billion industry. They promised to clean it up. I think the puzzle pieces are there compared to every single other genre of human trafficking. So I'm just seeing like a sea of greenwashing. I'm seeing a sea of people who think that thumbs upping something means that they've changed the world. And so my new challenges are, how do we get past that? How do we get past that to results?
Yeah, thanks. Miki or Terry, I'm not sure which of you would like to jump in and just give us an idea of, how simple it would be to solve this. My understanding is, and again, if anyone's interested, we can provide you information. There's leaflets at the back. But at the moment, farmers in West Africa are generally being paid around $1 for a kilo of their beans. And really to make it possible for farmers to hire adults into this work, it would be at least $2.50, and really to be sustainable, we're talking about $4 or $5. I don't know which of you would like to sort of leap in though and give us some more information along those lines.
You want me to go? Okay. Yes. Well, everybody agrees. Whenever you've seen a decent report, even coming out of the European Union or folks that are various NGOs that have looked at this, everyone agrees that the solution is to raise the price of beans. And I would say about $5 a kilo is kind of the agreed for what it would take to have a decent life as a cocoa farmer. The fact that they're not doing that is largely just an ongoing different kind of deception from the big cocoa companies. You'll hear them say that they're paying the price agreed to by the governments of Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, but what that price is the minimum they must pay. There's no rule that would prevent any of them from raising the price. Then they'll fall back on, if you ask Nestle, how come you're not paying more? They'll say, well, if we pay more, but Mondelez doesn't, we'll be at a competitive disadvantage. So they'll circle you around on every one of those rationales. But the fact is that we need to make them all pay the higher price. No one would be at a competitive disadvantage, and all of the farmers would benefit. And I just want to throw in, and then maybe Miki can add something to this, that if you consider the amount of money that these companies are spending on lawyers to fight me, and the PR campaigns that Ann mentioned, millions and millions of dollars a year, this must be pretty profitable to have a system that is dependent on child slavery, because they're spending so much money to protect that system that it really does highlight for us what's at stake. They want to continue this profit machine at the expense of children, families, and really the whole communities of these countries.
Thanks, Terry. Miki, and I know that you've got high hopes for EU transparency legislation, which is coming along. I know, Terry and Anne work really hard to make sure that consumers are aware, and we can all be making informed choices, despite the fact that, according to existing regulation, those choices are not actually being delivered to us as a right. So the onus is on us to seek the information, which kind of doesn't sound right to me. But Miki, I know that you hope that that's changing, and actually we as consumers are going to be better protected from being tainted ourselves by this, maybe unknowingly actually engaging in this industry.
Yes, I have, yeah. Big hopes, probably too big, but I have hopes. Just because I think the right way to do it is also making companies accountable about what they are actually producing. So what EU is suggesting now is that everything which goes into the EU market, you need to have like a kind of supply chain account. So you can't sell anything unless you can prove that it's not made by child slave or forced labor in general. That means a lot if it's possible to make this system. I believe it is. It's all about money, but that just tells me that there is a movement right now where there are more solutions to come. And I think this is one of the solutions. I know that you have in US a more or less similar system, but maybe Terry can say a little bit about it.
Yeah, Terry, because you're managing to get certain products not impounded necessarily, but certainly not used in certain situations. Is that right?
Yes, we have something called the Tariff Act of 1930. It's that old, and it's been refined a few times, and now it covers forced child labor. So it allows any person, anybody, to file a petition with the Customs and Border Protection with information that a particular product, a particular shipment, a particular company is producing a product with forced labor, including child labor, forced child labor. And then the Customs and Border Protection is supposed to, if they want, investigate, assess the information you've given them. And if they find that it's reasonable to believe that the product in question was made with forced labor, then they issue what is called a WRO, a withhold release order, that prevents that product from entering the markets of the United States. And then from that moment on, for that company, that producer, that importer to be able to sell that product in the US, they have now the burden of proof to show that a particular product was not made with child labor or forced labor, which is fair because all of these companies have been saying for years, decades, that they're not using child labor. If you're saying that, you ought to be able to prove it. And if you can't prove it, then you're lying on both ends. So that's fair. But the problem with our law, and I've read the EU's law that seemed even worse in this score, is that once you file that petition, it goes into the bureaucracy and you have no control over the timing or the further investigations or anything. So we filed our petition on cocoa February 14th, Valentine's Day, 2020. So 2 years and 8 months later, they haven't taken any action on it, and there's not much we can do. We complained, we wrote a letter, we got everybody in the world to sign the letter, but still we haven't had any action. So the EU law is in danger of having that same problem because each individual country under the current version of the law is supposed to set up an enforcement mechanism that's then supposed to cooperate with all the other countries, that's then supposed to initiate some kind of investigation process. It seems to me that it's going to be a bureaucratic nightmare, and there are much simpler ways to do it.
we'll stop talking legal stuff in a minute, but I just wanted to ask you to explain as well. There's another action that you're involved with, which is to do with claims, labeling claims that have been made. Yeah, I'll let you.
Yes, we filed a complaint about 18 months ago against Nestle as the first case under the California Consumer Protection Law, which prohibits misleading consumers. So we researched Nestle's website representations and the packaging representations, and we sued Nestle claiming that they were misleading the public. The case is called Walker versus Nestle. And a few months ago, the district court, federal district court, agreed with us that we had stated a valid claim, that we had plausible allegations that Nestle was misleading consumers with its packaging and labeling and website information. So the next step for that case is now we get discovery from Nestle. In the American system, that means we get their documents. We get to depose people about what they said and why they said it. What do they know that they're not saying? It's going to be a real wonderful process. And with the success of that effort, we have about 6 more ready to go against all the other companies that we're going to file in a strategic way, because each of them are doing the same thing, because of course they're coordinating what they say with through the World Cocoa Foundation, which should be also an antitrust violation, but everything that each one rolls out is coordinated with the others. And so each of them are as guilty as any of them for these kinds of misleading statements. So that turns out to be a nice alternative, that they're going to eat their words in a sense and have to be a little more concerned about not lying to the public about what they're doing.
Great, thanks for that. And you're right, we should emphasize that there are other than Nestle, there are other chocolate giants. There are also other products and other industries. And if we had more time, we could speak to Terry about Chiquita, we could speak to you about Tesla, we could speak to you about all sorts of things. I think it would be quite nice at this point to open the floor to questions. Humphrey, do you mind if I pick on you first? So again, Humphrey, just so that you're, you've got the mic there. Humphrey, well, I'll let you go ahead. But the one thing I want to say about Humphrey is that you began reporting on this in 2001 for the BBC. I think we all assumed that you were reporting on the countdown to the Harkin-Engel agreement actually kicking in and this being, this coming to an end by 2005. We're now in 2022 and the numbers have gone up, and we haven't allowed Terry actually to explain that what's been happening is industry have been giving themselves extensions of that deadline. So that's why we still are where we are. But now I will actually let you speak.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I'm late. I just flown in from Vancouver. You haven't seen the film yet, is that right? Okay, the film is fantastic. And what it does is actually brought to me when I first came across this story. I think it was actually in 2000 or something. And somebody said, you've got to come and have a look at this story. And I saw immediately that there was a direct link between the child that had had his feet ripped apart because he had tried to escape and the chocolate that we were getting off our shelves. And then when I went back, we filmed in a supermarket, and I got a bottle of cheap red wine, which cost £2 or £3, and it said where the chateau was that wine came from, but you couldn't find that on a bar of chocolate. And we went back again and again and again, and I was horrified each time I went back because of exactly what's happening. But I'd like to ask a question, if that's possible, to Terry. And I mean, you're not getting anywhere with the Harkin-Engel protocol, which I think was 2001. And I went to see Elliot Engel, I think in 2005, and showed him photographs of what we had seen in the pilot project. And he said he was absolutely furious. And he said, fool me once, fool me twice, fool me 3 times, and you're dead. But of course, they are more powerful than the democratic process. They are more powerful than the governments of the countries that they're in. So I think my general question here is, you are chipping away. So you haven't won anything. None of us have won anything substantive. We've done the movies, we've done the court cases, but are they listening at all? Or are they, as pig-headed as they were when I first came across them, and asked one of the executives, when you get up in the morning and take your kids to school and go to their open days and look at yourself in the mirror, what do you think?
Thank you, Humphrey. That's a great question and a great sentiment. I wonder that myself, and I actually say things like that to the lawyers that are opposing me, like, how do you look at yourself in the mirror, defending enslavers of children? And I can't answer what they're thinking other than the economics of it all, that at some point they've sold their souls, and like Neil Kotchel, they got a hell of a good price. But the fact is that I think the companies will only stop if they feel like they'll be forced. So each time we almost get there, like they think they're going to lose in court, then they want to talk to us. But the minute then the momentum shifts and they get a conservative judge to rule in their favor, then they don't want to talk to us anymore. So I think that they're only talking if they feel threatened and that we have to enhance the threat. I do think that you're going to see us take more personalized action against the individuals who are responsible at these companies, because most people don't know who the CEO of Mars is, or Mondelez, the guy who makes $16 million a year. I think the public ought to meet them, and that's the next phase. We're allowed to sue the individual decision makers in our cases going forward, and we're going to start doing that. I want them to have to explain to their families why they just got sued.
Yes.
Terry, is this like the Cochran family? I mean, is that kind of what we're talking about, as far as that nobody knew about the opioid pandemic and who was behind it? And now we're seeing the Cochran family in person and individual accountability and trying to drive that message. Is that kind of where, and the order of magnitude of what we're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. I think so. And I think that the chocolate companies are even worse. What the Sackler family, the pharmaceutical companies, did is sell a product that they knew was dangerous, but it was a very short period of time before it became a catastrophic spreading of this addiction. And so I would say that when they started, they probably had no idea, or it doesn't matter, but that happened quickly. They didn't have it in their face. But these chocolate companies have been enslaving children for decades. And instead of acknowledging it and fixing it, they're just trying to figure out ways to avoid responsibility. So never once will you hear Nestle or Mars say there is no child labor, there is no forced labor at all. They're instead hoping you don't pin it on them or make them accept responsibility for it. And every corporation loves to act as a body so that you're in effect immunizing the individuals there. But yes, behind every corporation are the individual Sackler family types that are enriching themselves on these horrific practices.
Thanks, Terry.
You
Oh,
have a
we have
question?
a lot of
You have a
questions.
lot of questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Firstly, just to say thank you to everyone on the action, and just kind of hearing all the work that you're doing. I think on behalf of humanity, I can say just really kind of important work. I have a question from a slightly different angle, and so I guess Terry, you know, obviously you're kind of fighting these big corporations on a legal front. I'm just thinking, I know we've talked about Nestle, and obviously there are many other companies like that, but for instance, with the Cocoa Living Plan, that's kind of an example of positive action, I would say, but I'm sure in terms of like the scale of the issue, it's probably quite small and insignificant, right, in comparison to the large. But on a slightly different lens, is there a way that you think we can act on the legal front in collaboration with these big companies to affect change? Or do you think that we're so far gone that that is a really kind of non-starter?
Terry, I know that you've had a really good relationship with supply chains in the course of the legal process, for example, where you felt like, you know, if it was just us getting together here, we could sort this out. So this is more about corporate strategy rather than there being a problem at the individual level, isn't it?
Yes. Thank you for the question and the clarification on that. Yeah, I feel that certainly in my own discussions with people working within the companies, that they know they can fix it. I, having studied their supply chains, know that they could fix it. Based on claims they're now making in their new programs, they claim they can fix it, but they just haven't been required to do so. And so it is a corporate decision. It is a decision, let's keep doing this as long as we can get away with it because it's highly profitable. That's not cynical. I think that's reality, that they are going to continue to do this until somehow, whether it's a new EU law or we win our next case or something actually holds them legally accountable, that they'll keep doing it and they'll just be changing their rhetoric. You'll see, if you look at the complaint for the Trafficking Victims Protection Act on our website, we really have pages and pages of the history of this. But you'll see, like Humphrey mentioned, that in 2001, they signed the Hark and Angle Protocol. Then they started marching in lockstep. They were announcing 2005, they gave themselves an extension, but they started announcing new programs together. The COCO CLMRS, it's some kind of monitoring system. Then they all announced they were doing that. Then they all announced these new programs like Mondelez Cocoa Light. They are continuing to roll out a new PR move, hoping that the public will be satisfied that they're taking sufficient action. And at the end of the day, I think as Ann was driving towards, we need a whole lot more help from consumer power to make them feel a little pain in their pocketbooks while they're continuing to get away with this.
Okay, we've got lots and lots of questions in the room, Terry. I know you can't see it, so let's try and crack through them all as quickly as we can. I think we'll keep the questions going for about, say, 5 or 10 more minutes, and then we'll let everyone leap into the film.
Okay. My name is Amarachi Clark. I'm the founder of London's first bean-to-bar chocolate makers, Le Coco. And what I've heard today, well, we've been doing quite a lot of research on this anyway, being a bean-to-bar chocolate maker, but a lot of it is focused in the US and the EU, but we've left the EU and we've got a government that's talking about leaving the European Human Rights Court. So we have a problem here. And I think that over the 7 years I've been making chocolate, all I've had is to refer to is the US. And I think you guys are doing amazingly, but we haven't really made so much strides here. And so we've been doing quite a lot of research on what we can do. Plus we signed up to Play Free Chocolate. You asked those questions. And so I guess one of my questions to you actually is around the Modern Slavery Act, because we spoke to Lord Fields, who did the review of that, and he was like, you need to go in and change some of that stuff because he's done the review. And I feel like that's the piece in the UK that we can do, and that is voluntary. You just have to be a revenues of a certain amount, then you just have to make a statement. And I guess it's who then review it. What's the second part of that? And
it's a
how
really,
do we
really good...
change that part in the Modern Slavery Act in the UK?
Yeah.
Because we have loads of chocolate on our shelves and we know what it's like.
Yeah.
So I guess that's my question.
Yeah, and I think at the moment in this political climate, we're in danger of losing that regulation as well. So these are really febrile times in this country. It's a really good point. I'm really glad you made it. Terry, we need one of you over here. If you could just replicate yourself and head over. But let's talk afterwards. Let's stay in touch and let's make sure we're on it. It's a really, really good point.
But I don't want to, I can't make an announcement for another group of lawyers, but keep your eyes peeled and you're going to see a chocolate case being brought in London by some really good lawyers fairly soon.
That's a round of applause happening here.
Hi, my name is Kamal Kinyamba. I am a journalist, model, and also I have my own foundation helping children and also children on the streets as well in Congo. My question is, child trafficking has been something that's been ongoing for many decades. Let's say you were able to win your fight to stop child slavery within the industry. What would happen to children and families who heavily depend on working for those farmers in order to provide for themselves, and even for children providing for themselves and also for their families? Because, for example, when I was in Africa just recently, a lot of the children had to depend on doing things that weren't really considered as normal for children in order to just have clothes in their back. So I would say, let's say you were to win your fight would you be able to now help children get into schools? Because that's the thing about helping everyone. It's not, you may be able to help 50%, but not 100%.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. Terry has personal experience of literally doing so in the past. But Miki, I know you've had some experience of this as well. Would you like to jump in?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I've been given this question a lot of time. At the end of the day, and people who have been traveling or been to Africa, you know that poverty is a thing. And at the end of the day, if you do not pay people a decent salary for what they're doing, then children are not going to school. That's just the thing. On the top of that, we have lots of children who are not from the countries like Ivory Coast and Ghana. They come from the neighboring country where it's even more poor. And we need to stop this really evil circle of circumstances, because before we end child labor, they need to go to school. We need to get anyone to school. This is where everything starts. I think Terry has been working with this in India, and I think he likes to tell a little bit about that system he was a part of not many years ago.
Well, very briefly, thank you. First of all, in every situation where there's just pervasive child labor, almost always those kids, as Miki mentioned, aren't going to school. And in a lot of contexts, including the cocoa sector where the children are trafficked, they're not getting paid. They're not sending money home to their families. So that's kind of a myth. In fact, the cocoa industry is now perpetrating by comparing this to the family farm that they used to work on when they were growing up somewhere in the hills of farm country. That's just not true. These kids are not getting educated. So the cycle of poverty will continue, because they're not going to ever be able to get good work and take care of their own families without an education. So in India, where I had the pleasure of working with the Nobel laureate Kailash Satyarthi, together we started a program that was called Rugmark at the time, but now is called Goodweave. And they have a fantastic website, goodweave.org, where we, using the market, we went after the carpet sector for using child slaves, and we made them pay to get a label that was independent certification and verification that they're not using child labor. And they had to let us monitor their factories. In exchange, they got a label that became very valuable because people wanted not to buy carpets they weren't sure did not have child slavery. So with that money that we collected, it was a form of a tax, really, 1.75% of the value of the export carpet. We created schools all over South Asia, and any kid we found working in a carpet factory, we put them in the school, we fed them, and so many thousands of kids have now graduated. So you got to figure out a way to raise the money to then take those kids who have been victimized and put them in school. And Goodweave does that fantastically. Take a look at their website. That's the kind of model we've urged the cocoa sector to adopt.
Yeah, and I think just very, very generally, the view seems to be that if farmers are being paid a proper price for their beans, they can be paying, they can be putting their own children through school, feeding their children, knowing how they're going to sort of keep everything, put food on the table tomorrow, which is the problem now. And it means that the adults themselves who are now working on those plantations are able to feed their own children. So it can be solved pretty quickly that way, to be fair.
You might just actually answer me by saying it's all in the movie, just watch later. But who are the enablers? And because I'm from a farming family, and the situation in Africa, I don't understand yet. Is the enabler different from the farmer? And can you just maybe clarify a little bit? Because
we have to sort of very, very quickly, and we'll have to talk about this some more in the bar afterwards. But The fact is that this used to be a great, a farmer could raise a family and live well and live respectably for a very, very long time. And we're simply not in that situation at the moment. It's very much to do with how much farmers are being paid. They can't leave the farm. They can't farm more sustainably, and they certainly cannot afford to do what they do if they pay, living wages to people on the plantation.
There are most of the family-run farms, which is 95% of all in Ivory Coast, for instance. There are like between 3 and 6 acres. Is that the right? Yeah. Anyway, so it's quite small, and that's what you have. But they can have, beside the cocoa trees, are rubber trees. And more are actually stuffing using cocoa. Really good. Pay for it, and the whole cultivation of the farm is really difficult because of the diseases and stuff. So I think you can make, if you are lucky, you can make 3-4 bags of cocoa a year. And I know you know how it works in Philippines, isn't it? We have been talking, yeah. But I don't know how it is in the Philippines. You told me years ago about before the COVID. But I don't know how it works in Asia at the moment. But you told me about there are like problems also.
So I think we've got time for just one more question. I'm so sorry, everyone. Please. Oh, 2 more questions very quickly. And then I think what we'll do is just keep the chat going on afterwards. It would be great for our in-person guests to be able to get up and have a little break for 5 minutes. For everybody joining us on Zoom, what we're going to do is put a link in the chat, which allow you to click straight through to the film. But we'll get back to that in a minute.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth Ukana. I'm a former BBC journalist, but now I work in policy and have a particular interest in food policy. My question pivots back to the court of public opinion. This is a noisy media landscape in the sense that I think the child labour conference in South Africa this year noted that there are 160 million children who are working in child labour, and that's up by an increase of 8 million. So in that noisy media landscape, how are you going to make an impact? I know you're taking partnership approaches, but I'm keen to know how you're going to make an impact.
I try to do my best. I've been working on this cocoa. I'm a journalist originally, and I've done 85 films. But one thing has never left me, and that's the child labor issue in Africa. And it's not going to leave me before we have solved this problem. Big words. But I think what I do is I genuinely read a lot and push a lot on Twitter and social media in general. And I go to schools. I think visiting schools is a really, really good place to start, because this is the next generation. And does it really help? I don't know, but I don't really care, because I think in my mind that that's the way to communicate. On TikTok, a few has reached out to me, and they have been doing films on TikTok, which is viewed like tons of times. So I think social media is a way to push on this, because I don't think that a film like this will change much, because otherwise my previous films should have changed all of it. And unfortunately, that's not what happened. And so I think like being constant on social media is a way, if you are doing it like an activist and pushing people and never give up, basically, because as I said, I've been working on this since 2008, and I'm still doing it. And that's the reason why I'm here, to push and push and push, and more people get the knowledge. And I think at the end, we will succeed, not solving the whole problem, but a lot of the problems. And I think that's the only way to do, because the easiest thing is just to give up. I know it's, you could just give up and say, well, someone else would do the job, probably, or hopefully. But I'm not giving up at all. So I hope that gives a little bit of hope, and you should do the same. And I think you do. And if we stick together, we can make it. We need to make the changes. And I think the timing is right now. So that's what, yeah. Keep up the good hope.
Hello, I have a question for Terry. My question is, I don't know much about law, so it's a bit of a legal question. The moment you show there's an empirical connection between child slavery and the chocolate that is being sold on our supermarket shelves, I'm just wondering, what are these lawyers that defend these corporations saying to defend these corporations? Because I'm thinking, you mentioned the kind of money they're getting, and I'm thinking, even if I got like 10 times that an hour, I still wouldn't be able to stretch my imagination to the point where I could come up with, a reasonable argument to defend these corporations. So yeah, my question is, what are their arguments, if we want to call them arguments?
Yes, thank
Mickey's
you.
just explaining that we do see all that in the film. But yeah, we'll let you do a quick answer.
Okay. Yeah, you'll see in the film that, first of all, they just lie. Mickey does a brilliant job of showing the Nestle lawyers stand up and say, there is no child labor in the supply chain. Then he'll cut over and show child labor in the supply chain. So you'll see that. But mostly, never once, even in the Supreme Court, these horrible right-wing justices, they drop footnotes or they acknowledge in the text that child slavery in cocoa is a horrible thing. They've never found in any court that this isn't happening. Instead, they come up with these very technical, like jurisdictional arguments. The reason the Supreme Court held that we didn't win this case wasn't that there wasn't child slavery. It was that they interpreted the statute we were using to require significant US-based conduct. That's a standard the court invented. But these lawyers, they're speaking the same language with these conservative judges. They're pro-capitalism, and they got to give the judge a little bit of an excuse to really nullify the statute and save the day for capitalism. That's really what we're facing. So we just got to keep hoping we get better judges. We don't have to go to the Supreme Court again, but it's a terrible cycle. But there's a moment in the film, you're going to hear it, where Neil Kochel, once again, he was President Obama's Solicitor General, and he fancies himself like a progressive. He got kicked out of our community, but he stands up in court and makes the technical argument that corporations can't be sued for slavery. Only individuals can. And even the right-wing judges just ripped him to shreds on that. But he did that for $2,462 an hour.
Thanks, Terry. So I think what we're going to do is just bring it to a close here. Anyone who had questions online that we haven't answered, anyone with other questions, do just get back in touch. We'll keep this conversation going. We will contact everybody who's registered to this event with more information, links to some of Terry's legal documents, any other information that you might like. Everybody in the room, please feel free to jump up and grab a drink, and we'll set the room up for the screening, which we'll have in just a moment. And if you're on Zoom, please hold on for a second. I will switch off the video so that I don't look too hopeless while I put a link in the chat, which will send you off to view the film online. Now, that's going to be the 1 hour film. What will happen is I'm going to end the Zoom recording itself, and what that will do is you will have to have already made a note of the link in the chat, so that you don't lose it. So once you've left Zoom, you won't have access to that link. Okay, I hope that's clear with everyone. I'm going to put that in the chat now and give you, plenty of warning before we close out. Terry, thank you so much. I'll come back to you before we close out altogether. But as I said, I'm just going to do some faffing and I'll come back to you all. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Good to see you.
We can remove some of it and this, so it's a little bit more.